I'd like to take you through something which I think is probably the one most powerful thing I do when I work in an organization. It's also the first thing I do. So this is called value and failure demand analysis. And what it does is that it looks at the start of an organization, what happens when customers interact with that organization. And that's the start of a service. That's where everything starts to happen. What we look at here are all the demands that come in, and they get normally funneled into a service or process. In this case, there are two standard processes where those demands get funneled into. But we're particularly interested in those demands before they get funneled. So what I do is that I listen to those demands that come into the contact center using a headset, or I read the emails, or I look at the forms that come in, or I go to where people come in and I stand behind the desk and I listen to what they have to say. I don't look at the data that people have recorded about this. And this is a very important point. So what is this? So this is about someone calling or submitting a form into an organization. They want something or they need something from that service. They put that demand in and someone responds to that. Either it's an automated response or someone physically responds. If that response that someone gives is not exactly what is going to be needed to fulfill the demand, then what that happens is that it creates another demand later on. And that other demand is dealt with by someone else who then does some work. They may then cause other demands to occur, depending on the service. The original green demand is called a value demand. The other demands are called failure demands. So the value demand is the demand that we're actually here for, that the service is designed to do. The failure demands are those demands that the system has caused someone to make those demands. So it's caused by the design of the system itself, in whatever form. And these are defined by the customer. So if we look at an example, a quick example of repairs, could be repairs to a property. I want to repair. That's the demand that comes in. That's what the service is here for. It's a value demand. When are they coming? Now that's a demand that has been caused by something that hasn't worked right. That's a failure demand. No one has turned up. Someone's put a card through the door to say that they've turned up, but no one was in. That's also a failure demand. That shouldn't be occurring in a perfect service. I want to speak to, which is a very common demand. We don't know what that is. So we'll put a question mark against that until we go further and actually find out what's going on there and where those demands end up. I want to change my appointment time. It's because me as a customer, something has changed in my life where I want to change that appointment. And the service should be able to adapt to that level of flexibility. So that's a value demand. Whatever you came to fix is broken again. That's clearly a failure demand. And I need something new done in my property. I need something changing. That's something that you're there for, and that's a value demand. So you can see how these things work. The most important thing is that the definition of value and failure is not defined by the organization, but it's defined by the customers. It's from their perspective. Now let's have a look at what then happens with all that information. So what I do is I record this and I ask the organization to record it over a period of time. And this is a typical example of what happens when we summarize all that recording of a week, a month, and we get this. So let's have a look at this. And what can we see? We can see that on the right-hand side, we have the failure demands listed and the percentages. On the left-hand side, we have the value demands. And at the bottom left-hand corner, we have the totals. Value demand is 37.3%. Failure demands are 62.7%. Now, when the team that I'm working with developed this, we have the manager in the room, and the manager looks at that, and I help them to see what that means. Effectively, what that means is, compared to a perfect service, we have created 62.7% failure demands. Therefore, if we redesign the service, the ultimate potential of that redesign would be that we could remove those failure demands. Now, that's a very powerful message. And there aren't many managers who would get very excited by that and then want to make a difference in terms of what they're seeing on that sheet. So they normally say, what we now have to do is have a look at what's creating those failure demands. And that's the next step that I do when I work with managers and organizations. So what have we done? It helps us to understand how well we're doing. It also, and this is really important because I don't know any other way of doing this, by actually listening to individual demands, we understand what matters to customers. And this is why it's important not to look at data, but to look at real demands. Because when someone's expressing those demands, you find that they express the context of those demands. They express what's important to them about this. It's not just a demand. So when we do that, the organization recognizes how they have to respond. Is it urgent? In what context is this about? So that we can then design something that fits that context. Now let's have a look at what happens when we get that demand from an organization. So if we look at the repairs organization, typically they'll have KPIs that are focused on 3 different types of repairs, and they need to be done within 24 hours, 5 days, or 20 days. And in this case, the organization was achieving that in 95% of all the calls. So what's the problem? What we did is we mapped out all the demands end to end. When did they come in and when were they completed? And the mean is 31.8. And you can see that many of those repairs are done far longer than 30 days. And some of them obviously are done shorter. But that makes a mockery of those KPIs. And what was occurring in this organization is all sorts of cheating and manipulation to massage the figures so they would go in the right direction. But no one had ever seen this, and no one had ever seen the picture of these demands because they would always be averaged out. These demands are by day. And if you actually look at what's going on in that graph, you find that there are various times when something in the system changes. And if you look at when those occur, you find that the senior managers introduced different activities and different procedures to improve the service. And when they saw this, they realized that, in fact, those activities hadn't improved at all. They'd actually made things worse. This was totally invisible to the managers or anybody in that organization before we actually did it. And you can do other things in terms of the data and graphs. So this is the situation where demand was coming in terms of IT problems, and we were looking at what were the causes of the variation. And by looking at that, we would then be able to go to the place in the service that was causing that and decide whether or not we wanted to fix it. So what it also does is help us to point us to where we need to go to make the changes. And again, those are normally invisible to us. We normally go to where the problems exist. This tells us where to go, where the causes are. That's very different. Lastly, when you do this in different services, what you find is there are different types of service. One service type is simple and transactional, like online shopping. Another one is simple, but has many different types of demands coming in, high variation. Another one is where you have expertise required to be able to answer those demands, like software support. And the fourth one is where the service is dealing with complex issues. Those are issues that don't have an easy solution or don't have a logical way of resolving them. And there's many services that are like that, especially in the public sector. And the question that I always have with the organization is which ones of these are suitable to be online and which ones of these are more suitable to be handled face to face or by people. Thank you very much. That was Value and Failure Demand. If you want to know more, I have more information on my website, and that's my email address if you want to contact me to talk to me about this. Thank you.